Hey, welcome everyone. This is Fabian here, Fabian Maisonneuve. I'm a licensed advisor at New Zealand Shores Immigration Consultants. We're launching this webinar for health professionals from Hamilton, New Zealand. And it's my pleasure to welcome as guest speakers today my colleague and licensed advisor, Charlotte Stockman.
Morning.
And we also have with us today our partner, Annie O'Donnell from TONIX Recruitment.
Hi.
Hey, Annie, TONIX is one of our most valued partners and they specialize in health recruitment. So really the best people to talk to all of our attendees today. What we're going to do today is we're going to spend probably a little less than an hour together discussing opportunities in the health sector in New Zealand. And we're going to be discussing the recruitment process as well. Charlotte will give her insight in the immigration process and I suppose visa options in the light of upcoming changes and in the light of COVID restrictions in New Zealand as well. Just a little bit of housekeeping. If anyone has a question during the chat, so we've collected a few questions already in anticipation for the webinar, and Annie's colleague, Kate Armstrong, in the background will try her best to answer as many as she can as they pop up. If everyone could please put those questions in the Q&A rather than the chat so we can centralize everything. Charlotte, would you like to introduce yourself quickly?
Sure can. So as Fabian said, my name is Charlotte. I am a licensed advisor here at New Zealand Shores. I have been with the company for 7 years. And for the last 12 months, predominantly have been working with healthcare workers and their families to help them into New Zealand. So very familiar with the process. And even though it's constantly changing and evolving, we're staying atop of those changes so we can help you and your family migrate.
Thanks, Charlotte. Annie?
Hi, as Fabian said, I'm Annie O'Donnell. I'm a senior recruitment consultant with TONIX. TONIX has been established for about 20 years. We work in the New Zealand health sector. We predominantly focus on inbound health recruitment into New Zealand, and we mainly specialise in nursing and allied health and their registered health professionals. We work across the country. We are a preferred supplier to the national hospitals as well as all the private surgical hospitals.
Great, thank you, Annie. So would you please tell us, Annie, what are the areas in need in New Zealand? Where are the most job opportunities?
Sure, look, across New Zealand, there's areas of need for mental health, not just nurses, but allied as well. So clinical psychologists, social workers, occupational therapists with skills in that mental health area, also alcohol and drug counsellors. There's also needs for theatre nurses across the country, ODPs or operating department practitioners, and as well, there's regional areas of need for people like ED nurses, NICU nurses, PICU nurses, physiotherapists, oncology nurses, and also some surgical nurses as well.
Right, no shortage of opportunities by the looks, and it's certainly something we've witnessed, for several years, but particularly in the recent months, COVID ironically has created opportunities for prospective migrants to New Zealand. Now we have a few people from, we have people from all across the world attending this webinar this morning, but particularly the UK, Ireland and Canada. How different would you say is working in the health sector in New Zealand compared to certain other countries overseas? Can you give us your insights, Annie?
Sure. Look, interestingly, I've spoken to a couple of recent people that have arrived in the country in different areas of health and just got their insights around this, just to give current information. And they've said to me that largely the differences are around IT systems, sometimes drug names. A recent ODP that came in said that roles between theatre nurses who scrub and anaesthetic technicians in New Zealand are quite clearly delineated, and she said that's just taking a little bit of getting used to. However, she actually thinks it speeds up theatre times and it's more efficient in terms of the way it works. So Largely, those health sectors are very similar to New Zealand.
Right. So I'm guessing, yeah, if you say they're largely similar, it doesn't take too much to adapt to, but I'm guessing that's part of the guidance that TONIX provides. Can you explain what sort of support you provide to prospective migrants? How do you assist with them, with getting them across?
Sure. So look, we start off in terms of the type of process we use. We wait until we've got a CV from somebody, then we establish a call with them. We go through with them what their professional and lifestyle aspirations are, and we learn a little bit more about the context, you know, why they're wanting to come to New Zealand, who they're bringing with them, those sorts of things. And then from there, we look to support them through registration processes, through interviews. We look for roles for them. We reference check and present them in the best possible light to clients, and then support them, as I said, through the interview process, giving them information that's maybe unique to New Zealand that can come up in interviews. And then from there, we just give ongoing support and guidance in terms of, you know, these are the next steps that you need to do. These are some of the quirky things you need to know about getting into New Zealand and establishing yourself. And then we provide ongoing support for the next 3 to 6 months, just to make sure people are settled. And if they've got any little glitches along the way, we can help sort them out.
Right. It sounds like you're holding people's hands in the best possible way.
Absolutely.
Do people have to pay anything for your services?
No, absolutely free and no hidden costs. People do pay for their own registration process. They pay, as Charlotte will probably mention, around visas and things like that. We also try and get some relocation assistance from the hospitals when they are job offered, just to offset some of those costs. But our service and the support we offer is completely free to the candidates.
Right, fantastic. Cheers for that. Now turning to Charlotte, can you tell us a little bit about the situation at the border, how things have been going with COVID in New Zealand, the restrictions that it's imposed, perhaps the opportunities it's created, and how New Zealand Shores has been assisting? We have a short presentation in the background. Just let me know once you want to kick it off.
Oh, you can probably jump into that now, Fabian.
Right, okay.
Awesome. So, yeah, COVID, wow, the border we initially thought was completely closed just over 12 months ago, but for healthcare workers, they are one of the only groups who have had basic free travel into New Zealand since, was it end of March 2020? So for everyone attending this webinar, the border is very much open to you. Yes, you do have to go through managed isolation, but you can still enter, do your 2 weeks in a lovely 4 or 5 star hotel, and then you're able to go out, start work and live life in, well, we're our own little bubble down here in New Zealand. We have no COVID restrictions at all. So life is very much as normal for us down here, which is pretty awesome. Haven't had any massive lockdowns. We've had one, but that's, yeah, 6 weeks at home and that was it virtually. So we're very lucky. So yeah, New Zealand Shores, our service is purely visa assistance. We take care of everything from your border exemption request. Once that's approved, you then apply for a critical purpose visitor visa. And then depending on your occupation, there will be a different visa you apply for once you're on shore.
Well, let's look at that in more detail.
Yeah, there we go. So Annie can talk through some of this as well. Obviously, occupational registration is definitely TONIX's strong point. It's not ours. There is documentation that, of course, TONIX will need as part of assisting you with getting a job, and there's also documentation that we need from a visa perspective. So we work with you to get everything ready for your visa application, and the documents we assist with and we advise on, the documents required from your border exemption right through to residence. A lot of those documents do cross over, so you will end up providing the same types of documents for most of your visa applications, but there are some unique things which may catch people out depending on their situation, and that's where our expertise comes in. And then, of course, job search strategies, which is purely what the TONIX team can assist you with, and I'm sure Annie talks to that a little bit later as well. So at the moment, process is a little different to what it was pre-COVID. So it's become basically a 3-step process to enter New Zealand, or probably actually a 4-step process. So initially you get the skilled job offer, and that is what facilitates you to allow to apply for what's called an expression of interest, or I also call it a border exemption request. That border exemption request, we basically submit details about you and your family, your job offer. Immigration will review that generally over 24 hours, and the next day you will have an invitation to apply for a critical purpose visitor visa. That critical purpose visitor visa is what facilitates entry to New Zealand at the moment. So we can't unfortunately go straight to the work visa. We have to take this middle step. So that critical purpose visitor visa is granted for either 6 or 12 months, depending on a few factors. One's generally your pay. So your salary will determine whether you get a 6 or 12-month visa. Once you're onshore and once you've gone through that managed isolation, or MIQ, that's when we, at the moment, and this will change and I'll explain that in the next slide, but at the moment there's 2 types of work visas that we would apply for, and this is determined by the job you receive. So probably 90% of people apply for what's called an essential skills work visa, and the other 10% apply for a talent work visa, or also called a work to resident work visa. And there's 2 streams under that. So there's the long-term skill shortage list, which is the LTSSL, or there's an accredited employer. These are all set to change from the 1st of November. So if you arrive before that date, these are what you apply for. However, if you arrive after that date, basically, oh sorry, I see we've skipped the resident slide, we can go back to that. After the 1st of November, things will look a little different. So employers will need compulsory accreditation. That becomes mandatory. There is no option around that, unfortunately. Those work visas that I've just outlined, they're actually ceasing to exist, and they will be replaced with what's called an accredited employer work visa, or AEWV. However, this changing, if you already hold either an essential skills or a work to residence work visa, that will remain valid for its full period. So even though as of the 1st of November, you can no longer obtain one of those visas, if you have a 3-year visa, or if you've got 35 months left on your visa as of the 1st of November, that will still remain valid until its expiry. Immigration New Zealand is still highlighting that the skilled migrant category, and we'll go back to that in a sec, that is the preferred pathway to residence, and there is no change to that. So these work visa changes that are coming into effect on the 1st of November have absolutely no impact on your ability to apply for residence under the skilled migrant category. If we go back a slide, sorry Fabian, I skipped that. Yeah, so at the moment there are 2 pathways to residence. So one I've talked about, skilled migrant. Majority of the people we deal with apply for residence under this category, and there is also talent residence. So those work to resident visas, or talent work visas as they're also called. After 24 months of holding that visa, you can also apply for residence under residence from work. Most people, especially healthcare workers, will choose to go under skilled migrant at the moment, because if you hold an occupational registration, you do get prioritisation. So your residence application would process generally in about 4 to 6 months, as opposed to having to wait the 24. After the 1st of November, when people can no longer obtain those talent work to resident visas, that residence from work pathway will basically cease to exist, except for some highly paid people. They are keeping that pathway in place, but skilled migrant will definitely be the preferred pathway to residence.
I think that's it for, yep, I don't know who that is. Cool, fantastic. Hey, thanks Charlotte, that was a great overview. And look, we understand these changes can be a bit confusing, but that's, hey, that's where New Zealand Shores adds value. We guide you, we hold your hand for visa purposes and immigration related matters through the process. We keep you updated of the changes, and we tell you what documentation is needed at each point in time. Although there is a lot of crossover, each visa category has its own set of requirements. So it can be a bit confusing, particularly with the changes. As Charlotte just mentioned, the COVID pandemic and the border restrictions that have resulted of that have created a few hoops that people have to go through in order to make it to New Zealand. Is that your experience, Annie, as well? Has COVID created opportunities for prospective migrants in the health sector, or has that made things a bit more difficult?
It's probably made things a little bit more difficult. We're finding that we're probably putting double the time into helping people get to New Zealand now, just because the process is a little bit more complicated. Registrations are taking longer, particularly nursing registrations. A lot of universities are still closed, and so getting documents out of those to verification bodies is actually quite challenging. So we're running a few interventions along the way to try and help speed things up, but we are finding that COVID has created a barrier. Interestingly, one of the things that's happened is because the pathway is more complex, some of the New Zealand hospitals have just kind of almost put recruitment of international health workers into the too hard basket, just because of the level of support and the degree of uncertainty. So where we can help is that we can get past those recruitment IT platforms, and we can get in behind to the recruitment teams that we know really well, to the hiring managers, and we can advocate on behalf of our candidates and say, look, this is a fabulous candidate, you need to look at them. We know we can get them in to New Zealand within X amount of time, all going well. So it's really helpful, and we're finding that the people that we're getting that really do want to come into New Zealand, we're getting them jobs and we're getting them in.
So you're saying working with a recruitment partner such as yourself brings confidence to prospective employers, doesn't it?
Look, it does, because they know that someone's helping that. I guess it takes it away from them, so they don't have to put their more limited resources into helping that candidate. I think one of the things COVID has done is it's probably taken a lot of the health budget away from business as usual, and it's put it into COVID. So there's just not, I guess, the same level of resource and support available from and the hospitals just want things as least complicated as they possibly can get them. So that's where we can kind of step in and help. I think one of the frustrations that we find is people that come to us from overseas and have already applied for 10 jobs in New Zealand and are quite specific about where they want to go. And they come to us and say, look, we keep getting declined. Can you get us a job? And we say, look, who have you been to? And they'll tell us, and we almost sort of put our heads in our hands, because if someone has actually gone to employers directly, then we cannot act on their behalf with that particular employer. So that, at the moment, is probably more of a frustration for us than previously.
Right. So we've seen that, thanks for that, Annie. We've seen that from an immigration perspective, it certainly has made things more difficult. Although New Zealand welcomes health professionals with open arms, that extra visa application that's required, the critical purpose visa, the cost of it itself is minimal compared to the opportunities that working in New Zealand provide. We have a question, a good question from Sherry though in the Q&A. That quarantine, who pays for it, and what sort of cost are we looking at? Sherry seems to have read that the costs have recently doubled, but does that apply to health professionals? And what sort of cost are we looking at the moment?
Okay.
Charlotte, perhaps?
Yeah, so for healthcare workers, I think, Annie, correct me if I'm wrong, I think it's still sitting at 3,000 for the first adult, is that right? And then it's
3,100.
You're 3,100, there we go, I was almost there. And then I believe it's $1,000 for subsequent adult, and I can't remember off the top of my head what the children are. Sorry, it's been a while since I looked at it. Annie?
So it's 3,100 for the first adult, 900 for the second, and 475 for each child over the age of 3.
There we go. I wasn't too far wrong.
Yeah, pretty much on it.
From the governance perspective, there's sort of an expectation from the New Zealand employer to cover those costs, but in reality, who really pays for it? Annie, from your personal experience?
Look, it's quite interesting. We're finding a mix of responses. Generally speaking, interestingly enough, it's the public hospitals that are probably paying most of that. We're finding that they're either paying the full cost for that first person, so that would be the 3,100 for the person they're employing, or they're paying for the entire family in some instances, which is fantastic. Some of the private surgical hospitals that possibly offer a little bit more in other relocation assistance are paying 70% for the employee, so maybe a little bit less, but there's still the greater amount of those costs are being picked up by the employers.
Right. And do you find that more widely speaking, do you find that the larger employers such as district health boards or DHBs in New Zealand tend to contribute to relocation costs? That could be, paying for flights or a container to come across, visa services perhaps.
Yeah. With the public hospitals, and look, this varies, but I'll give you an average. So there's sort of outliers on either side of this, but generally speaking, what the public hospitals will do is pay a one-way airfare for the employee, and they'll pay their managed isolation costs, and sometimes they'll give 1 to 2 weeks paid accommodation once the person and their families come out of managed isolation. The private sector will usually give us some of money towards relocation, and the employee can choose how they allocate it. So they might use it towards an airfare, they might use it towards visas. As long as they provide receipts when they start work, then they get reimbursed to the level that's been agreed. Generally speaking, the employer does get the person to sign a bond, just so that if they left within, say, 6 months and it was a 12-month bond, they would repay 50% of the relocation assistance that they were given.
Right, that makes sense. I mean, it's obviously quite a commitment from a New Zealand employer to commit to employing someone from offshore, so they expect some level of loyalty, or at least contribution to the job. That makes sense. Now, slightly shifting subjects a little bit, whether for a recruiter or an immigration consultant such as ourselves, key to your migration is your competence, your skills, and the best way to show these off is obviously by sending a CV. That's the first thing we would be asking from someone, and that's obviously the first thing that you guys, Annie, would be looking for. What do you expect to see in the CV, and do you assist in perhaps reformatting it to a format that New Zealand employers respond well to?
Look, generally speaking, we can give people templates if they're a little bit stuck on how to format their CV. But as a rule of thumb, keep it simple. If you just need brief contact details. New Zealand employment law says that you don't need to put things like your birth date, your religion, your gender, your marital status, things like that. So all you want is your contact details, maybe a brief summary at the top, just this is me, this is why I want to come to New Zealand, and these are some of the skills I bring, just a couple of sentences. Then from there you go on to your professional qualifications. You don't need to worry about primary schooling, secondary schooling, it's fairly irrelevant. It's more those tertiary skills that employers are looking at. So you want accurate dates, the name of the qualification, where you got that qualification from. Then in terms of employment, the best thing to do is just make sure you've got accurate dates again, the name of the employer, your current role, and just maybe a bit of an outline of the department or the ward that you work on, just so a New Zealand employer that's not familiar with the hospital or the area that you're working in has kind of got a bit of a sense and can equate it to something in New Zealand, and then some key points about the job. One of the biggest things that we see is sometimes people just cut and paste off job descriptions and have these long, lengthy list of skills and, sorry, not skills, but areas of responsibility. You just don't need that. With your employment, start with your most recent employment first and do it in reverse chronological order. Then you could add information about some of your professional development that's relevant, like it might be a basic life support, or if you're in mental health, it might be a cognitive behavioural therapy certificate, something like that. Put those next, and again, the dates and whether the certifications are current. Then you could put your personal interest, just to give an employer looking at it a sense of who you are and what you like doing in your spare time. And then finally, just references. So for someone that's only been working for about 5 years, 2 pages is adequate. For someone working for sort of 10 years plus, you might go into 3 or 4 pages. But yeah, keep it succinct, keep it short.
Right, I've put some of the contact details there for everyone to see. Is inquiries at tonix.co.nz the best way to send your CV?
Absolutely. Or you can actually just go onto our website, and through the job board, you can actually log onto our website. But sometimes it's just easiest just to go through inquiries, send your CV, give us a little bit of an update on your situation, and then we can come back to you and set up a phone call with you.
Great, sweet. We as part of this webinar, we've been asking that everyone sends their CV to us as well, so we can.
Oh, great.
A full eligibility assessment free of charge. There's still a few people I haven't seen a CV from, so if you haven't sent it yet, please email health@newzealandshores.com, just so we can get an idea of your visa prospects, what sort of category would be aiming for, and also do a points calculation for residents under the skilled migrant category. So we know we've seen the benefit of using a recruitment agency such as yourselves, Annie, as opposed to undertaking the process yourself. Charlotte, what would be the benefit of using an immigration agent as opposed to undertaking the migration process by yourself?
Yeah, a lot of people will choose to use us purely because they have a lot going on. You know, when you're trying to move country, you're trying to pack up your house, you're trying to organize a new job, applying for visas and dealing with the paperwork for a lot of people is just the last thing they want to deal with. So we get a lot of people in that camp. We also get a lot of people who are concerned about making a mistake or messing it up, or they might have complex health and character concerns, which means that they do need that extra bit of advice to be able to write character waivers or write health waivers. The other thing at the moment is because that process has changed significantly since pre-COVID, with all those extra added steps in, plus with the changes coming into effect at the end of the year, it does make our advice a little bit more valuable, just purely because we can say, okay, great, this is the situation you're in now. However, you're arriving 2nd of November, therefore this will be the visa you apply for. We can also advise on all of the documentation required, and time again, I will have people come to me and say, well, this wasn't on the immigration website, why are you asking for it? As a company, we've been in business for 11 years, and we've had staff who have worked for Immigration New Zealand. So we have that whole knowledge base of a group of people who have worked across literally thousands of cases, plus people who are bringing experience in from Immigration New Zealand to say, well, actually, yes, the website states this, but in reality, you need to provide that plus X, Y, Z. So we can make sure that we are submitting applications that aren't going to get 20 questions or 20 document requests coming back for additional information, which actually saves you time because your visa will process quicker. It means it's going in assessment ready, approval ready, so that it goes through, you know, your case officer and you get an approval. Generally, for a work visa, we're seeing them sort of about 4 weeks at the moment. Critical purpose visitor visas as little as a week, generally only a couple of days, and those border exemption requests are 24 hours. However, if you get something wrong or you don't provide the right information, those timeframes could blow out by weeks, or you may receive a decline too. So obviously that's worst case scenario, but that's really where our expertise and knowledge comes in.
Great, thanks, Charlotte. Because obviously a visa decline could mean that the New Zealand employer has obviously lost faith in your applications, and you could get the job offer withdrawn as a result, which is less than ideal, obviously. Now let's broaden the topic a little. As I mentioned, we received some questions in anticipation for the webinar. So this one's for you and perhaps Charlotte to answer afterwards as well. Any best things and challenges about moving to New Zealand? I'm sure you get a lot of feedback from your candidates once they've arrived here and started working for a few weeks.
I think in terms of the best things, I think the main driver for people looking to move to New Zealand is lifestyle. We're really fortunate. We've got a beautiful country with a really accessible outdoor lifestyle, and that by far and away is the biggest driver, I believe. Some of the challenges for people, look, I think if you come in with unrealistic expectations around how quickly you're going to feel settled, that can be a bit of a stumbling block. Generally, we find it takes people, particularly families, if they're migrating permanently. I think that's a different scenario. They can sometimes take about 12 months to really start feeling settled in New Zealand, and that's completely natural. They've left family and friends and they're re-establishing networks in New Zealand. I think probably one of the other biggest surprises, if people aren't really well researched, is Auckland particularly isn't cheap to live in. It's comparable to cities like Sydney, maybe a little bit cheaper in terms of real estate, but it is more expensive. Food's more expensive in New Zealand. And interestingly enough, Wellington has a bit of a shortage of house rentals at the moment. And so that's driving up prices. So that's another region that's probably a little bit more expensive. Elsewhere around the country, it's still quite, still reasonably affordable. So they're probably the biggest things.
Yeah, housing and the cost of living as a whole, as we know, but yeah, quality of life unbeatable, that's for sure. Charlotte, your insights in this?
Yeah, in addition to what Annie said, I think really one of the best things about New Zealand that I've had feedback from is our sort of work-life balance. Most people will, it's not you're having to live to work, you work to live is probably the best way to put it. And that's across all industries, including healthcare. So obviously I know a lot of healthcare workers work shift work, which obviously isn't always the best, but otherwise I think even from my friends who are nurses, they seem to be able to get time off when they want it. They can quite often request the shifts they want, which I think is a huge thing too. So that's really important. And of course, access to, the outdoor lifestyle. Where we are in Hamilton, I could go 40 minutes in each direction and have a trail to run or a mountain to climb or a beach to go to, which I think is absolutely incredible. So yeah, and Annie's 100% right. I definitely think it takes most people at least 12 months to settle, plus cost of living in Auckland. So yeah, there's not much I can really add in addition to what Annie said, but yeah, we're pretty great down here in our little bubble.
Yeah, that's for sure. Where do you see applicants typically not meet requirements, Annie? Is that in terms of work experience or at the registration point, people might be lacking in certain things? What's your experience in this?
Look, I think by and large, you do need 2 years postgrad experience in your own country before you can apply for registration in New Zealand. That's for midwives, nurses, and quite a lot of allied health professionals as well. So that's probably one area. The registration bodies in New Zealand, a lot of them are requiring a minimum of a Bachelor of Science degree or a bachelor's degree in their chosen profession. And so that's probably having an impact, although interestingly enough, the UK Higher National Diploma in Health is probably one of the exceptions to that. And I think one of the reasons is that the UK NMC, or the Nursing and Midwifery Council, have got really stringent requirements around postgrad professional development, and that makes a really big difference. So it's all about the registration bodies in New Zealand seeing ongoing professional development. That's really important, and seeing those undergrad qualifications.
Thanks for that, Annie. We know that registered nurses are in critical shortage here in New Zealand, but what about sort of the two ends of the spectrum? Healthcare assistants versus nurse practitioners. What are positions like, and are there pathways for these people to come and work?
Look, as we typically work only with registered health professionals, we have found that it's quite difficult to get healthcare assistance visas. And Charlotte, I might get you to kind of comment on that in a second. I'll go over the NP pathway, but yeah, certainly we find it quite challenging to bring in healthcare assistants. We can employ them within New Zealand, but not from overseas unless they've come in previously on a working holiday visa, which is not available at the moment, so with the border restrictions. But for nurse practitioners, what they need to do in the first instance is get registration as a nurse in New Zealand, and then they can start their registration pathway for nurse practitioner. It does take about 12 months, the NP pathway. It requires as a minimum a master's degree, and it's a process that involves trips to Wellington to the New Zealand Nursing Council, interviews. So generally speaking, what we suggest is that if you're a nurse practitioner wanting to get your NP in New Zealand as quickly as possible, that's a discussion to have with an employer and say, look, would you support me on the NP pathway? Because it does take some investment in terms of time to actually get there, but it's completely doable.
For sure. And as far as nursing is concerned, are there certain specialties more in demand than others?
Theatre nurses are probably the highest demand, and midwives. General surgical nurses in pockets. Sort of, Auckland's got the most vacancies in terms of health professionals across the country, but there's definitely needs across the country in certain areas, sort of more specialty areas like oncology, ED, paediatric and neonatal intensive care, those sort of areas. So yes, definitely there's vacancies. The least number of vacancies that we can help fill tend to be more medical, district nursing, those type of vacancies. And mental health, there's a lot of need across the country.
Right. And does having experience in a COVID ward, as might be the case for a lot of UK registered nurses,
Yeah.
is that a benefit in what you can bring to a New Zealand employer?
I think this is going to sound, and it's not meant to sound a gloating comment, but because we haven't really had to deal with the pandemic on a wide scale in New Zealand, it really probably is neither a plus nor a minus. I've recently had a nurse come in and start at a private surgical hospital in Auckland, and she was working on a COVID ward in Ireland. And in all honesty, I don't think it was either a plus or a minus in terms of the employer looking at her application. It was more the fact that she was general surgical experience that they were looking at.
Right, sure. Thanks, Annie. Lots of questions about family members. Can I travel with them in the first place, or do I have to bring them in afterwards? And that question will be for Charlotte, because it's largely to do with the visa process. So can I bring my family and partner with me, my kid and partner? What about my dependent children if they're 18-year-old or over? Can you enlighten us a little bit about the family matters, Charlotte?
Yeah, so the short answer is yes, you can bring your family with you, that's partners and dependent children. With the way the border is at the moment and that whole border exemption request critical purpose visitor visa, at this stage, you can only initially bring dependent children who are up until the day they turn 20, so 19 inclusive, because that is what Immigration New Zealand stipulates a child is being dependent for under temporary visa policy. However, you can include your children up until the day they turn 25 for residence. So even if you have a 20-year-old, 21-year-old and they're studying and they want to migrate with you, they are classed as dependent, but at this point they would need to wait until residence was approved to be able to travel. That is causing a lot of frustration for some of the clients I have at the moment, because obviously the whole family wants to travel together. I have had one exception to this approved in the last 12 months. So yeah, it is quite hard to get children over the age of 20 in at the moment. But yeah, absolutely, you can bring your partner and children. Of course, there's the additional MIQ costs, which we've already covered. And you can add now, as of a couple of weeks ago, you can actually either bring them with you initially, or the principal applicant or the person with the job offer can travel first, and then the family can travel a bit later. So partners and dependent children of healthcare workers recently got added to the border exemption criteria list, which means that, yeah, you don't have to travel all together as one unit. You can travel separately if you wish. So that kind of takes us back to the good old days of 13, 14 months ago, where quite often the principal applicant would travel out first and then the family would follow. So yeah, that's a good step for our healthcare workers for sure.
Thanks, Charlotte. That clarifies things. So we've talked about the age sort of limits, the age threshold for dependent children. What about the age threshold for the principal applicant? So I'll turn to Charlotte for visa purposes. Is there an age limit essentially? And then to Annie after that, in terms of employability, what is the age cutoff where your age is no longer considered experience, but it's more detrimental to your application? So over to you, Charlotte, first.
Yeah, from a visa perspective, there is no age cutoff for a work visa. So you can come and work and live in New Zealand, you know, at any stage. I just had I've got two nurses arriving into the country next month who are in their 60s, who are coming for a 3-year period. But you can only apply for residence generally up until the day you turn 56. However, and it's not something we've done much of, but you can apply for age waivers. So that is a process, obviously, because things have been on hold for some residence applications the last 12 months. As soon as, you know, those start to open up and start processing again, we do have a number of clients we will be seeking age waivers for. However, just be aware it's not a guarantee, because it is basically making a special request to the minister. But generally, for healthcare workers, we're pretty confident that they'll get approved. But yeah, that's something I think case by case basis. Probably talk to us before you assume you're going to get an age waiver. But yeah, 56 generally is the cutoff for residence.
Annie?
Yeah, no, same, similar answer, like when Charlotte was saying about the two nurses in their 60s, that's definitely doable as long as you meet your registration requirements and you meet health requirements and you meet your character requirements, then age isn't a barrier.
Right, so a 65-year-old nurse, for example, is just as valuable as a 35-year-old one.
Absolutely.
Okay, great. What I might do is just share the screen again to put our contact details. That pretty much is the end of our webinar, unless there's more Q&A, more questions popping there. I'll just put the screen with the contact details in case anyone hasn't had a chance to write them down. A few words you'd like to say in closure, Annie, and then over to Charlotte.
Yeah, look, we're passionate about what we do. We love working with our overseas candidates, and if you are interested in talking to us, we would love to hear from you.
Great, Annie. It's certainly a pleasure working with you guys. Charlotte?
Much the same as what Annie has said. We absolutely also love what we do. I think as a team we live for what we do, and it's been a real big pleasure working with all of our healthcare worker clients for the last 12 months, and in particular working with TONIX. Relationship is so valuable, and we quite often bounce off each other quite well. So yeah, our services do complement each other. If you haven't already, I would recommend reaching out to us for a free eligibility assessment, or even just to chat about your circumstances, your family, where you want to end up. And if you haven't engaged with TONIX, then absolutely do so, because their services will be so valuable to you. But yeah, health@newzealandshores.com. Your email will come straight to me. I can provide an assessment for you. And I can also organise a free Zoom as well. So we can sit down, have a one-on-one, discuss you, your family, and your requirements, provide a quote, all of those kinds of things. So yeah, please do reach out.
Thanks, Charlotte. Yeah, one of the greatest pleasures we have in this job is working with people via email for several months, and eventually, you know, at the end of the trip, be able to meet them coffee in our office. Yeah, it's a fantastic feeling. People are here, they can tell us about how they've been adapting to their work and life in New Zealand as a whole. And I can't think of many people who've changed their mind and gone back, to be honest. So
2 families in 6 years go home. So I think that's a pretty good testament to how great New Zealand is.
there you go. Hey, thanks a lot, Charlotte, for your valuable input, and Annie and her team. You're doing a fantastic job. Any questions, you've got our details now, whether to TONIX or New Zealand Shores. And anyone who's registered to this webinar would get a recording at some point this week. Thanks again, and you all take care.
Thanks, Fabian.
See you later.
Bye.